Hey, welcome to Don's Model Works, and it's part 2 of our Ford Woody Street Rod. And we're in the main workshop, slightly larger, but still really huge, cluttered mess, which is normal for me. So, this particular episode, we're going to be starting off by doing all the wood grain parts. Hopefully. Actually, by the end of this video, you might be seeing it painted some other color. The plan is I'm going to be airbrushing all the parts with, what do we got here? Gloss natural wood. So as you can see, that's very similar to the color the parts are already, probably a little bit lighter. And then I've got some light tan, and that's going to be putting some highlights on it. And then I'm probably going to be dry brushing with Tester's Flat Rust, which is a much warmer color than the Flat Military Brown. And I have done wood grain before. We'll take a little break from the work here just to show that wood graining I've done before. But basically, a big part of your success with any model is how well they've molded the wood grain into it. If there's lots of raised detail to work with, the dry brushing usually goes quite well. So we will see. So this is the Ford Louisville by AMT, and it's the variation that was done up as the Coke truck, as you can probably tell. The door itself did not have any molded in wood grain, so that was actually me sanding it in order to make it look really rough. And if we look inside, you can see the sides. Basically, what it represents is a solid piece of plywood on the side, and then some slats further up. And the floor as well had wood grain in there too. Basically, almost everything inside this had wood grain molded into it, and I just used dry brushing to do that. And if we just look in the back door here, which I have open as well, a little dusty in here, I made sure that the floor itself ended up starting with a really dark brown, because usually a wooden floor inside a truck really shows the dirt badly, and then the plywood usually ages to that kind of color, and then the slats farther up would have been a different type of wood and certainly would have looked differently. So I have done lots of wood grain before. I think this took me several hours to do. So, and you know, if you guys want me to do a quick project from the past video on this, and we'll give it a real good look around, let me know in the comments. Let's say if, I don't know, if 10 people say do a project from the past video on this particular model, I'll dust it off, make a few repairs on it, and I'll do a project from the past video on this one. So prior to airbrushing my plastic wood parts, there's certain things I want to actually glue together, and one is I want to put the blanking plate in. May as well get that in first. However, for reasons I'll get into a little bit later, I don't want my plate to cover over these windows. I'm going to be having a seat back here. So I was about to just snick this part off here. But upon closer inspection, you can see there's one ejector pin mark, and there's another one. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this at a right angle right here, and then I'm going to measure over, and then I'm going to cut it. And that way I'm not dealing with the ejector pin marks at all. Although, sadly, it means I'm not going to have a nice chunk of wood grain plastic here. But I kind of like that approach versus having to deal with these ejector pin marks. Alright, I have all of my main wooden parts of the body here, and I think it's been probably 2 weeks since I've painted them with natural wood, which is a nice overall color, but there's no color texture to it. So I'm going to start not necessarily by trying to hit all the highlights, and the highlights are actually what I want to be my darkest colors. But I do need to have some lighter coloration in here as well. So I'm going to start with some of this Model Master sand here. And I will be dry brushing because basically I just want the barest hints of lighter areas in here. So let's see how that goes. I'm actually not going to start with this panel. I'm going to start with, well, let's start with the back panel here. See what we can do with this. Now I'm just kind of calibrating on the fly here. It's been quite a while since I've done a lot of dry brushing to get wood texture. And the brush I'm using is an ancient crappy Tester's stick brush here. And I'm finding that these bristles are really, really stiff. And they're actually doing a good job of just hitting the raised surfaces here. So I think I'm going to stop using this one for my lighter stuff. I think I'm going to save this for my darker colors. I'm going to go with a softer bristle brush because I actually want to get into the valleys a little bit more. There's the upper surface of the floor. The lower areas here, I'm going to be treating those as painted wood. I certainly want even something like a hot rod that you're going to be driving on nice days. I think you'd probably want something a little more durable on here, such as paint rather than stain. But this area here is, I figured, would be unpainted wood in the very back. Here's the lower tailgate. I was careful to keep my strokes going horizontally on the large panels and then vertically on these other panels. I think I'm probably going to come back with the natural wood and just going to go over these areas very, very streakily again, just so that these areas look maybe a little bit darker, because I'm assuming that they would have probably made it of a different type of wood than the actual plywood panels. I'm pretty sure it wasn't plywood, but I'm sure it was a much thinner cut of wood in these big sheet areas here. And here's the back side. Once again, I'm going to make sure that these vertical bits end up being highlighted later. And as well as that, not only am I dry brushing, but anywhere where I think it's a little too heavy, I'm actually taking my finger and kind of going over it to remove a little bit of paint as well. Figuring it out as I go. Like I said, it's been quite a while since I've done dry brushing to do wood, and not only that, every kit is a little bit different depending on how heavy they've molded the actual wood grain in, how much that's going to help you or how much it's going to hinder you. Alright, as with most multi-step processes, step 1 into the process looks like crap. But I'm assuming it's going to look a little bit better once I go down a slightly darker color and then eventually go with the really dark color that I'm hopefully only going to be hitting the texture on. Of course, let's face it, a wood finish is a very streaky, not very perfect looking finish, so we'll see how this develops. So my next step in my wood graining here is to use some Tester's light tan, and I'm doing the same thing that I did with the other color, which I can't remember what it was. Oh, that was the sand. It was the sand. So I'm just basically dry brushing, going across, and I'm not so much trying to get the highlights, but the valleys and things like that, because the highlights, I really want that to be the darker color. So I've done this side here. I haven't done this side yet. What it's ended up doing is tone down the lighter color just a little bit, but it's introduced a lot more variation, so I think I'm on the right track here. So this is what we're looking at for 3 colors. Of course, we have our base color, natural wood, then we have sand, and then we have light tan. So this is how it's looking. Get a good focus on that. It is tedious to do, I will admit that. The next step is going to be to use a much darker brown, and hopefully I'm just gonna hit the ridges that Monogram has molded in here. And if we look at this chunk of wood, this is what I've been, wasting most of my paint on to get to a dry brush. And that's the key, that's the thing. If you've never tried dry brushing, you basically load up your brush and then you you get it to the point where there's almost no paint coming off, and then you go to the model, which is so different from what you normally would do when you're painting, whether it be a model or anything. Normally you're trying to get a nice load of paint on your brush. Of course, dry brushing is complete opposite. So we will see. I'm going to let this dry really well before I move on to the dark brown. What we're seeing right here is dry brushing with Tester's Rust. And I am using the really, really crappy old cheapo beepo Tester's brush with the very stiff bristles. And that seems to be just hitting the high points that Monogram molded into the parts. So I started with the floor, which you're barely going to be able to see. And I'll see how it looks on the other parts. Hopefully I don't end up ruining them and have to start over again. There's our wood grain after the final step. And basically after doing the Tester's Rust and only hitting the high spots, or at least trying to only hit the high spots, I felt that it was way too dark and stood up way too much. So I went back to the original natural wood, wherever that is, right here. And what I did is I literally dry brushed over the rust one more time, just to tone it down and bring it all within the same sort of family. You can see there's the interior. Now, these portions here, they look like they were metal plates. So you can see that's where the door handles are there. And there is our other side. And the tailgate. And the back window part that I left on the sprue. And I suppose last but not least, we have the floor. And this area is the only area that I'm leaving as bare wood. This part here appears to be metal, and that goes over the rear leaf spring and the differential. It kind of pokes up a little bit. The front area here, I don't know if they're intending that it be some sort of carpet or some sort of a mat. I'm going to paint it as though it's a rubber mat, the whole area there. So that's going to be kind of a German gray color. The underside, I figured even if you were doing this as a classic car, you'd probably want these pieces here painted, just because they're more exposed to the road and things like that, and paint would protect it a lot better than some sort of a stain or a varnish. I've painted the running boards here German gray, which, as many people know, is my favorite color for using for rubber, mainly because it's not quite as intense as using a flat black. It's tough to focus on, but this fan blade here has been filed in order to thin it out, whereas this one hasn't. It's probably about, maybe 20% the original thickness. So I'm going to be doing that. You can see here's the back side that's been filed. The front side with all the detail on it, I've left that alone. But all too often the fans that we get in our kits are just way too thick looking, so I'm thinning those down. The kit only comes with one seat, and that's this one here. But I've decided I'm not going to use this as the front seat. I'm actually going to mount it as a back seat right here. Now I will have to remove a little bit of the side of each of these so it will clear the wheel wells. What I'm going to use for the front seats is I have a mold of a set of bucket seats from a van, actually. It's basically can be used for either side, so I suppose it's one mold. And these are the same bucket seats that I used in the Racer's Wedge. And I figure that would probably be a legitimate thing for someone who's building a hot rod to put a set of bucket seats in. So that'll be the next step is molding up a couple of bucket seats. This is my completed front seat castings. As you can see, they're in two pieces, so that when you glue them together, you end up with this. These two little areas where you see filler, that's because the original part had armrests that were supposed to be glued on. I didn't have the armrests anymore. I suppose I probably should have filled that on the original before making the mold, but hindsight. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm putting bucket seats in the front, and this mark here represents the back of those seats. They're basically going to go from here to there. And I had thought that if I put my front bench, if I move it back to just in front of the hump back here, that would be far enough back. But you can see that that would probably leave less than a foot of scale distance there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to back this off till it's about there. And that should give our 1/25 scale passengers sufficient leg room or foot room or whatever. So that's going to entail nibbling a little bit off the back of the seat right here. These two little structures here are the pegs that hold the front of the bench seat. What I did is I sliced them off of the floor up here and I moved them back. So the seat just kind of perches on it. And you can see the area that I milled out of the back of the seat so that it could clear. So it basically sits thusly. Now I know there's no sides to this seat. I'm assuming that Monogram figured that you'd never be able to see it because it's up against the side of the car. I don't know. I'll be painting this leather, the same as the buckets that are going in the front. You can see that if I put the buckets where they need to go, that there's a decent amount of leg room now for those rear passengers. So here's our basic interior put together. You can see I've got the bucket seats from the van glued in, and I've got what was the front seat moved to the back. I just painted the back of that kind of a dark chocolate color. And as you can see, we actually have some space between the front and back seats. The floor, I just painted that German gray to represent some rubber matting, because I can't see somebody using carpeting in there. So I'm now looking at the amount of footage that I've got roughly cut together, and we're getting close to the 20-minute mark. So I think we should probably wrap this particular episode up. We'll just set this on the chassis here. There we go. Now I have done a few other things that I haven't actually showed. The interior of the roof has been painted this hunter green, which is what I've decided to use as an accent color. And I've done the wheels with the same sort of color. I haven't mounted the tires on the front yet. You can see that there. This is our dashboard. I do not have decals for the instruments. I still have to paint the insides gloss black, but there's no markings molded in there, so to be gloss black surrounded by a silver bezel. What else have I done? Not much. You can see here is the fan mounted onto our pulley. So, like I said, we're coming up on the, probably we've just gone past the 20-minute mark just a few seconds ago. I want to get this episode up. I'm going to be really busy for the next 4 or 5 days, so, and I really don't like my videos to go much past 20 minutes, so that's why I figured I would pretty much wrap this one up for this week. So, thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep on modeling.